This is Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, a podcast from the Foster School of Business, MBA Career Management Office. I'm your host, Gregory Heller. On each episode, I talk with guests from faculty and staff to students and business leaders about the skills and strategies that can help you design a professional life that you're happy with. On this episode, I'm joined by my fellow coach, Julie Boden, and we are going to talk about an issue that has come up recently with our students around applications and whether people are getting invited to interview for internship roles. And this is a perennial issue. And I think we both have an interesting way to reframe the experience. So welcome to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, Julie.
Thanks, Gregory. Happy to be talking about this. Reframing is an important aspect to kind of help us with dealing with when we get news we don't hope to get.
Right. So we've been hearing from students who've applied to some of the early recruiting companies that they've been rejected.
Mm.
Right.
This is a hard thing to accept, and it does
Yeah.
feel like a rejection. And I can't say that people don't really feel that way. But as you talked about, reframing their thinking to thinking about it on the bigger scope and looking at it as a being not selected for rejection is something that I recommend, especially because if we are applying to many jobs, there are also other students applying to these many jobs. And so oftentimes it is a selection process as opposed to an individual rejection.
Right. So a company puts up an internship, MBA internship opportunity, and they get hundreds or maybe even thousands
Thousands.
of applications, right? The larger companies, they're getting thousands of applications. And, when there are something like 10,000 MBA candidates in the top 25 MBA programs, depending upon how you count it, that is a large pool of potential applicants for every role. And you're seeing, thousands of people apply to some of these most coveted internship positions. It's a lot for a company, for a recruiter to narrow down to the candidates that they can reasonably evaluate for the limited number of openings that they have.
Exactly. Thousands of applications. And maybe in some cases it might be hundreds for those, but that is quite a bit. And I think especially in the current times where we are in a phase where there may feel like there are fewer opportunities. And I think it might be just kind of fractional, but fewer opportunities. And that same 6,000 students are all looking for those fewer opportunities. I think the other thing that happens is just there are more applicants for those positions. So recruiters are dealing with an onslaught of a lot of applicants to consider, and moving those applicants into candidacy is a tough decision for them as well.
Right, because people are sort of trying to spread their luck around by applying to maybe more opportunities than they would have in a previous year. And then the recruiters have to decide who are we going to bring in for an interview. And the cut can be kind of crude, right? Because they're looking at a resume and
Yeah.
maybe a cover letter, maybe
Yeah.
not even a cover letter, right? And they're deciding, what's the 10% of these applicants that I'm going
Mhm.
to bring in for an interview.
Absolutely. You're right. And again, whether they even get a chance to look at those cover letters, I mean, at hundreds of applicants, that's a lot of cover letters to read. So yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening is that there are so many individuals that they've got to make those decisions. So while it feels crude, what I often think about is that selection process from going back to my recruiting days. I think about that selection process as looking at those core qualifications that I'm looking for. And that becomes sort of kind of the basic meter. And a lot of people might meet that. But now there might be this added level of preferred qualifications, or ideally, it would be great if we had these people in this experience. And so sometimes we can get as recruiters, we get a little bit more selective into that category because we have so many applicants.
And this idea of reframing, of going from the idea of I've been rejected to, oh, I wasn't selected for this opportunity to interview. It's really about um, shifting your mindset, but also acknowledging that someone didn't interview and reject you.
Yeah.
You know, they may have filled their quota for candidates that they were going to interview before they even get to your resume and application in some cases.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That in some cases, that it is before were able to consider all of the candidates, they were looking at that fine. So it's not an individual rejection. There's not something that we did wrong. It might just be someone else did something better or different.
What else do you think students should do in this period of time when they are, receiving notice that they weren't selected for opportunities
Yeah.
based upon your experience in the past?
One of the things that I recommend is looking into these opportunities that you might have applied for and maybe making kind of a deeper look into, I wonder why I was not selected. What are the kind of the qualifications of that position? What might they have been looking for? And if it's a position we really want, what can we do to bridge that gap and acquire that experience to shift us more into that qualification process? I'm just going to take an example of some of the product management jobs that students look at that might have an element of maybe people having some computer science background or experience in that area. We can't change the fact that our undergrad might not be in a computer science degree, but what are the different experiences that we can work on in that first year of school, whether it's project based, the internships that we can, whether it's the actual internship we get or the other projects we can do to kind of support that experience that will bridge those gaps so that we are aligning ourselves into that category to shift us quicker into that selection bucket.
Right. So do a sort of gap analysis,
Yeah.
especially if you're seeing a trend of not being selected for a category of roles over, a period of time. Do a gap analysis, talk to a coach, think about what kind of opportunities either through applied strategy or through extracurriculars or side projects you can get onto your resume so that for a full-time recruiting, you have filled those gaps.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's kind of that bigger picture of it. For kind of for the short term, for some of the positions, is really, I know that there's a lot of students who feel like I should be applying to as many positions as possible. That's your choice, absolutely. I can understand why students might want to move forward with that choice. I have a tendency to I like to live in the world of probability and try to increase my probability as opposed to just trying to kind of get as many applications out there. So to increase my probability, I like to look at those opportunities that I'm a stronger match for. That yet there's always going to be that reach for different things that I'll do that might not be in that exact skill, but where can we target those opportunities and spend more time in maybe a quality reach outs, working with people in that sector to try to boost that probability factor a little bit more in that. So, as opposed to focusing on quantity of applications, focus a little deeper on quality.
I think that's great. The on one of my recent podcasts with Dr. Alexandra Samuel, she talked in terms of networking in this pandemic context that we're in, where we can't meet up with people. That quality really trumps
Mhm.
quantity, and I think that when we balance that with the lessons of the 2-hour job search, which we just ran some workshops on, the
Mhm.
book by Steve Dalton, and he was on the podcast also, which is about coming up with this broad ideation, coming up with a lot of companies, but then focusing your reach out interaction, on the ones that you prioritize. Because every year we see people who maybe do this really broad recruiting process
Yeah.
and get pulled in a lot of different directions and maybe meet with more not selections than they would like. It is a little bit more awkward. Well, be honest, it's a little bit more awkward to talk in the terms of
No, no.
not selections
Yes.
than rejections, but and the impact that that can have on one's confidence,
Yes, because you're
right?
right, because even though it is that not selection, it does feel like a rejection, and what we do sometimes is when we're applying to so many positions, we're actually compounding our sense of rejection because we've just put out, I don't know, 100, maybe 100 plus applications out there, and the probability that you were an exact fit for all of those might be a little bit low. So, that might feel like that added rejection when maybe it's possible that we weren't even interested in some of those, in maybe 60% of those positions anyway. We were just applying to those just because they were out there. And that's kind of something else that I think is happening, is that students from campuses all across the country are also applying for positions. We're in COVID times. We can all work from home. I might not have wanted to relocate that area, but now I'm considering this employer because I could do this from home. So,
Yeah, I've certainly had students in the past who have come into my office disappointed with not being selected, or even having gone through an interview process
yeah.
and not getting the offer,
Hmm.
and they're upset and they
Yeah.
feel hurt. And I remind them, at the beginning of the year when we first met and talked about the kind of things you were interested in, this was never on your radar,
Yeah.
right? You actually told me you weren't particularly interested in this field or this functional area or this company, right? And now you're sitting here telling me you're upset that they didn't select you or that they didn't extend an offer to you. And I think actually one of the guests on an earlier podcast, Salmir Salimi, talked about this. You have to be selective because you're
Yes.
opening yourself up. In each of these applications, you're opening yourself up. And even if it's something you're not interested in and you're like, well, everyone else is applying, I
Hmm.
might as well, that when you get that ding of
Yeah.
not having been selected for the interview, or interviewing and then not getting selected for the opportunity, that can really have a negative impact on your confidence
Yeah.
going into the applications and the interview processes that you are really excited about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up an important point about us being selective on our own, about really what are these opportunities that we're really looking for that are going to that stay center to what our goals were and what our purpose was in getting an MBA, and being selective, and maybe acknowledging that that doesn't mean that there are going to be hundreds of opportunities out there for that type of position, but focusing deeper with a more qualitative focus on those few that might be out there. Actually, few might be the wrong number to use, but that smaller segment than hundreds.
I'm reminded of something that I heard on the 10% Happier podcast, which is Dan Harris's podcast. He
Mhm.
had a guest, Bonnie Duran, who is actually a works at the University of Washington, and she talked about words that get her through a bad day. Is it perfect? Is it permanent? And is it personal? And
Mm.
as she described it in the "Is it perfect?", what that question really is about is like, is anything perfect? You might think that this is the perfect job for me. It was the perfect job and I didn't get it, right? But is it
Yeah.
really perfect? Is anything really perfect? Is it permanent? Right? Like, this is just one data point, right? And is it personal? And I think this is where it comes back full circle to earlier in our conversation here about, like, were they personally, the recruiter or the hiring committee person, considering every aspect of you and saying, no, we don't want this person? And that's
Yeah.
generally not the way it goes in these early selection processes for interviews.
No, you're right. And in fact, one of the things that I really, that's great. I love those quotes, and or that idea of measuring kind of those experiences, and on that personal framework that you're bringing back to. It's so true because again, we went back. We said there's thousands of MBA students, thousands of eligible MBA students in this class year, and in those students, again, maybe not all thousands of them will apply, or thousands will apply, but hundreds will. And when a recruiter is often going through their selection process, and they're reading through those, they are often not sometimes registering the name. They're really just digging into that experience and moving forward with people. So it's not a personal rejection. It's a it's a oftentimes a selection process that includes, we've got to move forward with these ones and the backgrounds that make the most fit, and hold on to these other ones. And it's, as a backup before we come up with something later that might be a better fit. And sometimes thinking about it from that standpoint might be helpful for some students to think about, again, what do I need to do to get my experience in that category to break into those consideration set in that top, whether we want to call it 10%, is making some assumptions about the applicant pool that they might move forward with that next level. Um, just to kind of make a shift, just going back to kind of my recruiter days and trying to have a little bit of empathy for some of the recruiters that are out there in having to help make those decisions and funnel those decisions for their team members that they're representing, is that they are they have shared and they do share that even though they do have tools that will help them filter through applicants through their ATS processes, most of them all have eyes, spend some time on every single applicant that goes through to make sure they're checking to who these if these people are indeed in that right category in that set. And that can be kind of a big task for them to have to handle. And so it does help to really think about, when we're applying for positions, are we applying for the positions that will be something that a recruiter will attract to our experience? Does our experience match to this position, as opposed to thinking about, I'm going to apply to any position at this company just because it's at that company? So, giving them an opportunity to spend some extra time on your resume because it indeed matches with the job description.
Yeah, the idea of really looking at credentials, or experience, and that even in this particular market, companies may be looking a little bit more closely at, do you have the experience that maps to what it
Yeah.
is that you're applying to do?
Yeah, and the other reason why I say that sometimes is thinking about, like, on the recruiter standpoint, and some of the people who might have been in hiring decisions might kind of have experience with this. But when a recruiter presents the top 10 resumes to their internal candidate clients, and they're saying these are the candidates we consider, oftentimes they're being judged by saying, okay, of the so you're saying these are the best of all the ones that we got, right? And so they've got to kind of connect that. I used to have to work with my managers all the time and explain to them why I selected them based on that information that they gave. I think you should consider X candidate because he has this type of experience. Y candidate because she's got this many years of doing exactly what we need. And on a recruiter standpoint, when I got it wrong, I had to explain to them what I needed to hear, because they don't want to go through the hundreds of applicants. That was my job, was to filter through the hundreds of applicants to give them the 10 that made the best fit for them to consider for phone interviews. So it really helps to make sure that we are including information that will help build an argument for why we should be considered for that position.
So there's almost like a perspective taking
Mhm.
that an applicant should do in taking the perspective of the recruiter. And this can be part of that like gap analysis exercise when
Yeah.
you get that unfortunate or unwelcome news that you haven't been selected to interview for an opportunity, is to take the perspective of the recruiter and think, I wonder why the recruiter didn't select me. Let me
Yeah.
look at my resume again. Let me look at my cover letter if that's applicable. Let me look at the job description.
Yeah.
But also, I would say to not put too much stock in that retrospective, because there are many more opportunities that lie ahead.
You're right. There are a lot of opportunities that lie ahead, and so finding those, identifying some of those other opportunities that seem like that are a better match for to make those skills. We've talked a lot about pivoting, and that's a great opportunity to really think about, how do I pivot my skills into that area, as opposed to make just a huge 2-foot jump.
Right. And the pivot, the idea of that sort of 15 to 70-degree
Mhm.
adjustment from where you've been rather than a full 180.
Absolutely. It shows then that we're able to position our value and what we're being to offer that those positions and those companies, because that's an important aspect of it as well, is really thinking about, what do I bring to the table? Not just that I want to do this. I mean, all the applicants that apply to the position have interest in the position. That's a given. But what value do we have to offer them as well in our ability to perform whatever they need in that internship role?
Any other advice that you would offer students as we narrow in on the end of the year and the beginning of this next year, with regard to thinking about their applications for internships?
Yeah. I think going back to kind of our first thing about being as selective as we can as well as we look at these opportunities is thinking about this opportunity from a basis of, is this the right fit for me? Is this something that will add value to my experience? And in what way can I add value to that experience? So when we're also being selective about those opportunities that we want to apply to, we're using hopefully our time a little bit wisely and able to invest in more of those opportunities that we think are that better match and that better fit for us. And then we'll lessen our sense of rejection. And then going into those ones, if there are ones that you feel like, gosh, I really, really felt I was a fit for this and I don't know why I wasn't selected, we could maybe do just a little bit of a deeper dig and not just talking about the aspect of, going back and asking the recruiter to why didn't you look at me, but asking them different questions, maybe not just recruiters or other contacts, and say, what do I need to do to bridge the gap? Can you give me some recommendations as I move forward with my first year of MBA program about the things and experience that I can do to add to my experience so that I will be in that stronger consideration set for next year?
Right. So students can talk to a coach about that.
Yeah.
Students can also, when they're doing outreach and coffee chats, informational interviews, just because you haven't been selected at a company doesn't mean that you should completely cut bait on that company if you're still
Mm,
interested. You can continue to reach out to people and ask them, what experiences you can gather in the next, 9 months that would make you
yeah.
a stronger candidate for full time. And every year we see people who didn't get the internship opportunity that they wanted, either in the role or the company, and coming back around to fall recruiting for full time or even further recruiting throughout the year, they
Yeah.
do find their way into the company, industry, or role that
Yeah.
they wanted to get into.
Yeah, I think playing the long game is important in this area because the whole reason why I'm sure students have made the investment to get an MBA is not just about what am I going to do for the internship, but really what path am I building my career on? And taking a look at that is important to make sure that we're playing that long game and thinking about the skills that we're building that are really going to get us to the role that we hope to be in, or the impact that we hope to have at grad and post grad.
Right. That's sort of coming back to the is it permanent question, right?
Yeah.
I think there can be the tendency to think this internship is what's going to set the course for the rest of my life, right?
Mm.
And it's not, and neither is the first job after graduation. Yeah, every
No.
year we see students who've graduated from the Foster School and get a great job out of graduation and start that. And 18 to 24 months later, they might be moving to a different company or a different role within the company where they landed. And it's important to remember that. I think I've read the statistic that the average tenure for an MBA, a newly minted MBA, in the role or company is 24 months, right? That
Something like
people
that.
move.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's important to think about, as you said, the long game, to take that longer perspective, to think about the internship as just one step in the journey towards the intended career goal, and that full-time job maybe as the next step. And then maybe, if you're making a really big change from where you were pre-MBA, it might be the second position after you graduate. So
Yeah.
putting it into perspective that this internship is really just one of those steps that gets you closer.
Absolutely. It's about that experience. And that's one of the things that we try to tell students a lot when it comes to these internships is it's a temporary job. It's 10 to 12 weeks. And we're thinking about what experience are we getting out of this? What opportunities are we going to have an opportunity to learn more about, and skills that we can use and build on? If we can focus on the experience, I think it's that better step to pivoting towards that role that we want to get into in the long term.
And you can get fantastic experiences at companies of all sizes. So even if you don't get the first choice internship role, function, and company at, the Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Adobe, right? Nike, that you can get an experience at another company
Yeah.
that will help you become more qualified and a better candidate for the roles that you're interested in at the companies that you're really interested in.
Yeah. I mean, not to sound too like kind of like just give some platitudes out there, but
Yeah,
it's, you get
it's true.
you you get out what you put in, right? And that's one of those things. The more that we're able to put in to something, and we have these opportunities because, we're constantly building ourselves, and the experience that we have today is not going to be the same as experience we've got at grad in 2022, or even, 10 years after that. It's just this constant building. So when we're able to put that quality attention and putting in, we tend to get more rewards out. So there you go.
Well, thank you for joining me on Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. It's been a nice chat with career coach Julie Boden. I think we've provided some good context for students, MBAs all over, but especially the students we work with at the Foster School of Business, of how to think about this internship application process and reframe the idea of rejection as not selection. So thank you again, Julie, for taking the time today. And we wish everyone a really restful and restorative holiday break.
Thank you, Gregory.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast. You can email me at gheller@uw.edu. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or classmate.